out to the gym. We're gonna hit an upper body day, but I need to hype myself up. I have not had my pre-workout, so we're gonna have these little, what are they? Cinnamon, they're like coffee cake bites. Because I like to have like sugary carbs before I work out, because you get a little bit of a pump and gives you a little bit of energy. Probably a little too much fat in these for what I would want, but they're really good. I think I got them at Target. They're like cinnamon cheesecake bite. I cannot open this to save my life. There we go. Look how good those look, and then they're like cream cheese. So good. I just really like having, I hate when people talk with their mouth full. I also love donuts as pre-workout snacks, or sometimes I'll have candy. So I always recommend to clients, like, have something that's a little bit carb heavy before your workout, like 20 minutes before. This is probably cutting a little close. Like, the carbs help give you that little bit of energy boost, especially if you haven't eaten in a couple hours. And the sugar can help give you a little bit of a pump. I know I've been really MIA on here. I have not made any YouTube videos in like 6 months. There's just a lot with work and trying to create content for YouTube, or for TikTok and Instagram. And then my dad died. So that obviously made things a lot harder. And I didn't train for a month. Like, there was like a month there right around when his memorial was where I just didn't work out pretty much at all. I just, like, it's one of those things where it's like you're just trying to like get by. You can't really do anything extra. So I just had to prioritize like my work and my clients, and then I'm trying to be more consistent. I had more sessions in October, and now I'm trying to get back into it more. But yeah, there was definitely like a good month there where I did not train, and a good 6 months where I've just not had the motivation to make a lot of content. So I'm trying to get back into it. Workout 1, we are starting with an upper body workout. I typically don't start with upper body, but this week has been a little funky. There's going to be a couple little tweaks that I made just this week. But we did start with a dynamic warm-up with a band for our upper body session. My main priority when I'm warming up for upper body is just making sure that my shoulders are nice and warmed up. Obviously, they are a very particular joint that, if not warmed up properly, can have some issues. But that being said, I don't typically spend more than 5 minutes on my warm-up. Into some pull-ups, I usually do 3 to 4 sets of as many reps as possible. Typically, by the third or fourth set, I can only get like maybe 1 or 2. My pull-up strength has gone down in the last few months as I have been gaining weight with my bulk. I am currently in a surplus for the last 2 months. So my pull-up strength has decreased a little bit, or at least I can't do as many because I've gained weight. Moving into some single arm machine rows. I really like doing these single arm, mostly just because the use of just one arm at a time allows me to get a little bit more stretch, both when the shoulder is completely retracted, the elbow is all the way back, as well as when the elbow is all the way forward and my arm is extended out in front of me. If you do not have this kind of machine, you could definitely do it on a cable instead, or if you are at home, you could totally substitute with like an incline dumbbell row. The goal here is just to keep the hand position neutral. This is going to be the best way to make sure that we're maximizing lat recruitment. Moving into some cable lateral raises, I am doing these lying down. I just like this variation. It's not necessarily superior to other variations in any particular way. I just like the way that this feels. It allows me to really focus on the eccentric portion of the movement. And by having my body stable on a bench, it allows me to prevent any excess momentum use. Now, this is definitely a back focus workout. Obviously, we had some shoulders in there, but I do want to make sure I'm hitting more muscles than just the lats. So we're going to be doing a seal row. This is more of a wide grip row, so it allows me to hit a lot more of the muscles in the upper back versus the pull-up variations and the single arm row variations that are going to be much more lat bias movements. This wider position hits a lot of rear delts. It also hits a lot of those smaller muscles, traps, all that fun stuff and the upper back, which I do feel like a lot of people neglect because everybody just wants to talk about the lats all the time. Moving into another upper back movement, actually, although technically you could classify this as a shoulder movement. This is a reverse fly, so it is technically targeting the rear delt, which is technically part of the shoulder, but it does also to some degree work some of the upper back muscles, so I kind of put it in that category. This variation is great if you are not able to use the incline bench, if you have a larger chest, or if you can't use a cable variation. This is a good alternative, but does take the momentum out of the movement by being seated. Then we're doing this as a superset. We're moving directly into incline curls. The component of the incline allows you to get a maximal stretch at the bottom of the movement. I am cheating a little bit here. I should let my hands come down a little bit more, but it's a great movement. Moving into day 2, we're going to be doing a glute focused lower body day. And I always start off again with a dynamic warm up, just doing some lunging, squatting, and hinging movement patterns just to get the hips and the ankles warmed up. And then we are going to move directly into our first movement, which is a hip thrust into glute bridge. I'm obviously using a hip thrust machine for this movement, but obviously you could substitute this with a barbell or with a dumbbell or whatever else you have access to. But as you can see, I'm starting off with a series of full range of motion hip thrusts. I believe for this set I did around 8. And then as my glutes started to fatigue, I moved into some glute bridges, focusing on a much shorter range of motion. But I did continue until it became very challenging for me to complete that full extension at the top, which of course made me look like I wanted to cry afterwards. For our second movement, we're going to be doing a glute bias RDL, but you'll notice that I'm adding in a partial with this movement. Now, this is absolutely not necessary. This is something that I do in order to increase the challenge for me. I was getting to a point where I was moving 100-pound dumbbells, and it was really taking a toll on my erectors and my back strength, and I did not feel like I was properly recruiting the glutes, even though it was becoming increasingly challenging for me to take the glutes to failure at lighter weights. So I've started incorporating this use of lengthened partials. Again, I don't think this is necessary for everyone. I think most people, especially if you're in your first couple of years of lifting, will do really well just with a standard RDL and focusing on good form and standard progressive overload. But this is something to kind of spice it up if you are looking for more of a challenge. This exercise is another movement that I've made some modifications to in order to increase the challenge for my personal needs. So as you can see, this is a split platform leg press where I am actually utilizing the platform on the opposite side of my working leg. So by bringing the leg across the midline, by adducting the leg, I am actually putting a little extra stretch on the glute muscle fibers, in particular the superior glute muscle fibers. Now again, I am doing this because I have mastered the single leg press. I feel like I've kind of capped it out in terms of my potential for what I can do in a standard form. So I have modified it to increase the challenge. But if you, again, are in your first couple of years of lifting, you would do just fine and benefit just as much from a standard single leg press. Next, we are moving into a cable abduction. Now, this is probably going to look a little bit like a glute medius kickback, and they are very similar. And there's nothing wrong with a glute medius kickback. I love a glute medius kickback, but you'll notice that I'm actually kicking out a little bit more laterally. Actually, it's a little hard to tell because of the angle of the camera, but instead of kicking back about 45 degrees, I'm actually kicking out almost completely to the side while simultaneously letting my foot come across my midline, just like I would want to do in a glute medius kickback. I find that this variation just allows me to increase the tension a little bit more. It is more challenging for me to do with less weight. And so I actually have found that this variation, now that I've kind of mastered and moved past my maximum potential with the glute medius kickback, this variation has worked really well for me. I am also taking this until I can barely move the weight. Workout number 3 is actually going to be an apartment gym workout. Typically, I would not have done an apartment gym workout for this workout. I would have gone to the actual gym. But this being a holiday week, it was a little hectic, a little crazy. So I made do with what I could. That means that there are going to be some exercise changes that I would not typically have done. And there is going to be a little bit of repetition between my day 3 and my day 5. Just because I only have access to so much equipment. But that being said, we are starting off with a incline Smith machine bench press. Typically, I would do a standard bench press at the gym, but again, working with the equipment I have access to, I don't always love doing a standard bench press on a Smith machine personally. I would rather do it with a barbell, so
this is why we opted for an incline. With this movement, we are going to be getting a good amount of chest, and then we are also getting a lot of shoulders, which is a big focus in my program at the moment. Notice with a lot of my more compound movements, I don't necessarily take everything to failure. So in this, I probably did an RPE of like a 7 or an 8. Moving into some back work, I am going to be doing some pull-up negatives. My pull-up strength, like I mentioned before, has been slacking. So I find that when I do increase my training frequency of how often I'm training pull-up style movements, it tends to improve my strength in that department. So that's why we're incorporating another pull-up style movement. Something you might have noticed about my style of programming and my split design is that I don't typically have like a push day or a pull day or a quad day. You know, I do have specific areas that I focus on a little bit more for that particular day. Like this is a push focus day in particular. You'll notice I'm doing lateral raises here after doing an incline press. But the thing is that, in my opinion, I do much better with taking movements to failure and really working at maximum capacity when I'm mixing up my movements to a certain degree and I'm not just pushing, doing a push movement, and taking all of those close to or to failure. I find that I can do a lot more and work with much higher intensities when I am breaking things up with a push movement and then a pull movement and then another push movement. So you can see here, we're moving into a pulling movement with some incline dumbbell rows. Normally, if I was at the gym, I would actually be doing this on a machine, but the movement is pretty much the same. So if you don't have access to a incline row machine, you can absolutely do these with dumbbells, and you'll notice I'm working them until I can barely move the weight. And then for our last movement of this workout, we did a dumbbell bench press. Now this workout was very funky. Normally I would not put this last. I think there were some people in the dumbbell area that I couldn't access the dumbbells themselves. So, but hey, hopefully it's helpful to just kind of see how you can make modifications to your workout based on the equipment that you have access to if it's not always there. For our second leg day, we're going to be doing a pendulum squat to start. This is an amazing movement for your quads. This is going to be a quad and glute focused leg day. As you can see, the pendulum squat forces a very high degree of knee flexion. Any movement where there is maximal knee flexion, meaning that the knee is coming far forward, preferably over the toes, which yes, is completely fine. It's really going to make sure that we're maximizing quad recruitment. Now all that being said, that does not mean that we are not still working the glutes. Depending on where you put your feet on this platform, you might be able to bias the glutes a little bit more, but the quads are always going to be working to a pretty high degree in any kind of squat movement. If I were to put my feet higher up on the platform, this would reduce the amount of knee flexion occurring. This is basically create more of a 90-degree angle at the knee, which would help to bias the glutes a little bit more. But I would not necessarily say the pendulum squat is the one to go with if you are really trying to target glutes on a machine. Generally speaking, out of all of the squat machines that you might have access to, the pendulum squat and the hack squat are going to be the most quad biased of the squat machines. I would say if you had to pick between the two, I would go with the pendulum squat. The natural arcing motion of the pendulum squat is fantastic for a much more natural pattern of movement that makes sure that you are still maximizing that knee flexion, but it's not increasing at too quick a rate as you might experience with something like a hack squat. That being said, though, hack squat's fantastic. If you need to go with something that's a little bit more glute biased, I would say maybe like a reverse V squat or just a standard barbell squat is fantastic. But again, you're always going to be working the quads, and I think that's a good thing. I think more people need to get on board with training quads and move away from this notion that we need to avoid growing our quads. This next machine would actually be another fantastic machine for you to do if you were trying to focus on a glute biased standard squat. This is called a Power Squat Pro. This would allow for a slightly higher degree of hip flexion if that was something you were looking to do during a standard squat. However, I'm using this to do a split squat. As you can see, I'm doing this on a deficit. This again is a way for me to up the challenge a little bit more. I've also adducted the front working leg. But again, if this is a new movement for you or you struggle with balance, grab some dumbbells, work on your stability, or grab the machine, leave out the deficit. The deficit is just something to really make the most of the movement, but if you're new to it, don't worry about it. Of course, no quad day would be complete without a leg extension. It's funny because I actually skipped these for years because, again, I was one of the girlies that thought that growing the quads was the worst possible thing I could do, so I avoided it like the plague. I also thought at one point years ago that it increased tension on the knees and potentially put them in a compromised position, but I have since learned in the last few years that it's actually the opposite. This is one of the few movements that will effectively work the rectus femoris, which is a muscle that runs from it's one of the quad muscles, but it runs from your hip to your knee. And because it is actually a biarticulate muscle, meaning that it attaches past the hip joint and past the knee joint, it is responsible for both hip flexion and knee flexion, meaning that when we are doing a standard squatting movement, it's not going to be very recruited because it is being shortened at the hip joint. But all that is to say that if we are not effectively incorporating rec fem training into our routine, it could potentially lead to some issues down the line. And I actually had a lot of knee issues that were resolved. Now, I can't diagnose them, but I do believe they were resolved when I did start incorporating this leg extension movement in my training. And now that we've thoroughly toasted the quads, we're going to move into a glute movement. This is a machine called a gluteator. Now, a lot of people probably do not have access to this. Yes, it is very similar to an abduction machine, but the reason I prefer this movement over a standard abduction is because of the way that the machine actually moves. So you can see instead of just moving out to the side, it's actually moving down and out at a 45-degree angle. And in my opinion, based on the structure of the glute muscle fibers, I think that this is much better for recruiting the glute musculature than just that very, very lateral movement that you get with a standard abduction machine. Now, that being said, if you would like to substitute this with the abduction machine, that would be completely fine. Personally, it's not my favorite machine in the world. I would prefer to do like a cable abduction or something like a gluteator if I had the choice. I do think it's an appropriate movement to choose in certain situations, though, as long as it's not being overtrained. I think where we have some issues with the popularity of the abduction machine is when people start to overtrain it and they're just doing it like 3 times a week. But if you want to incorporate it once a week, I think that's completely fine. I know that might shock some people given my TikTok content, but it's completely fine. I also think another good movement to put in here would be maybe a glute medius kickback, maybe a single leg hip thrust, something that would be really good for targeting some of the smaller, more minor muscles in this area. For my last workout of the week, we are going to be doing another apartment gym workout. This is actually going to be a full body workout. Now, I do want to stress, I think most people will be completely fine with just the first 4 days of this program. I don't necessarily think that everyone needs a fit day. I don't think you necessarily need to train all of these muscle groups 3 times a week, depending on your experience. This is something that I have started incorporating into my training, and I'm not totally sure if it's quite recoverable from because of the intensity that I train at, but I'm testing it out to see if 5 days a week is working for me. And as you can see, I'm starting off with a Smith machine Bulgarian split squat. And of course, because why not make a already very challenging movement even harder, I am adding a partial at the bottom here. Again, this is one of those movements that really is very challenging on its own. If you are not highly experienced, if you are not highly skilled at performing this movement, you do not need to add this partial at the bottom. Again, it's just a way for me to add a little bit more of a challenge without actually having to go up in weight while still being able to take that glute muscle fiber to failure rather than just increasing weight all the time. And as you can see, these are brutal. And then I don't know why I'm doing these again here. I think maybe I didn't realize I'd already done them this week, or it may be because I did them earlier this week and was supposed to do barbell curls, and then I don't have a barbell at my gym that I can do them with, or my apartment gym. So I did do incline curls again. I would probably substitute with like maybe a hammer curl or a barbell curl, something that is a slightly different variation. It's a little redundant to do this movement again, as fantastic as it is. Although my form was a little bit better here, so I'll take that. Movement number 3, I did a single leg hip thrust. Now, you'll notice I did band this. It was very awkwardly banded. I do love a band single leg hip thrust. They are very challenging. They are also very challenging with body weight or a dumbbell. The way I banded this, I banded one leg. So basically the band is going where the scrunch on the shorts are. Basically where your underwear would sit. It's not the most pleasant feeling. Did it work? Yeah, pretty well. Was it fun to do, and would I do it again? Probably not. I would say a standard band or just use a dumbbell, honestly. And then we've got a little bit more repetition. I think we're going to see a theme here. We are doing another cable abduction. Maybe this was a glute medius kickback. No, I think this is a cable abduction. Again, I wouldn't necessarily do this. I believe on that first day, I was supposed to do a machine kickback. I think that was the exercise I was supposed to do. So, nothing wrong with that. Just, again, a little bit redundant. Maybe do a different kickback variation on one of the days if you have the option to. But of course, still a great movement. Just don't necessarily need to do it twice a week. And finishing things off with a overhead cable tricep extension. I don't think I did any other tricep work in this week of workouts. I would probably normally have done one other tricep movement, probably on one of my other upper body days. But again, this was a funky week. Thanksgiving, everything was a little crazy. I think I forgot a lot of the things I did. So things are a little bit weird, but hopefully this gives you some ideas for your split design. And please make sure that you like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what other kinds of videos you'd like to see from me.